In December 2021, eRideables like e-scooters, e-skateboards and e-unicycles became legal on some WA roads, joining states like Queensland, Tasmania and the ACT, where e-scooters were already allowed. Back then, e-scooters were one of the world's fastest growing transport options, second only to e-bikes. But more than 3 years on, despite their popularity, e-scooters are still making headlines, often for the wrong reasons. So how are they tracking in WA? Who's using them? How safe are they? And what impact are they having on our roads and footpaths? Hi, I'm Andy Walsh and welcome to RAC's Horizons podcast. To chat about this, I'm joined by WA Road Safety Commissioner Adrian Warner and the RAC's Des Duguid, who heads up the organisation's eRideable workshops. Let's get clear though on the rules. WA's Road Safety Commission has recently completed a review of eRideable road rules, and there have been some recommendations to improve the safety of riders and the others who share the paths, obviously. A parliamentary inquiry has also been announced now. So firstly, what will that parliamentary committee be focusing on?
Yeah, it's a really positive development. The bipartisan committee is going to look at how we can make e-scooter riding, which is here to stay, safer for everybody and reducing the conflict, particularly between pedestrians and e-scooter riders. And that'll include looking at changes to the rules, looking at regulations around safety standards, and looking at things like penalties and things that are going to motivate people to behave safer.
So will the parliamentary inquiry, their recommendations, will that impact your review?
No, we think it's going to be a positive extension of the review. The review has been endorsed, or the recommendations of the review have been endorsed by Cabinet, by government. They've been published. We're now working to implement them.
So just backing up a little bit, walk us through some of the key findings from the review.
Yeah, look, it basically comes down, there's a few themes coming through there. Basically, there's some rule changes we need to do. When we implemented the rules back in late 2021, we followed the national model almost word for word. So basically road rules, we try and get consistent across all the jurisdictions in Australia. So we have a national process to come up with draft rules, and then every jurisdiction has to fit them into their own laws, and laws are different in each state. So there's a bit of tweaking by different jurisdictions. We pretty much picked up the national rules and put them in place. And at the time we said, well, look, let them run for a bit and we'll do a review. And so we've done that, we've completed that. The recommendations include some changes to rules, which will move people off footpaths and let them get onto low-speed roads where they can't currently ride. And for example, if you look in the Perth CBD, the Perth CBD is largely a 40-kilometre zone now. They've got the low-speed zone, which is good for bicycles and scooter riders being on the road. But under the current rules, because there is either a one-way street or a lane marking or a median strip, scooters can't lawfully ride there. But when you look at the amount of traffic of pedestrians on the footpath, it's probably a better option for them to be on the road. So we want to make it lawful for them to be on the road. There's a couple of other minor rules. The other focus of the review was around education and engagement, getting people to understand what the rules are, where you can lawfully ride. And we found that there was a lot of confusion about the rules, and there's a lot of unlawful devices out there.
So the confusion, is that why we've had the changes or the recommendations to the changes?
Well, that recommendation is to get out there and promote the rules more broadly. The key rules people need to understand is two things. There's basically the principle that we're saying that e-scooters should be treated like a bicycle. So, having a bell, warning pedestrians, wearing a helmet, single person on a device, they're all the same rules that apply to bicycles. They've been in place for a long time. And the specific rules around e-scooters as a device, or eRideables more broadly, come down to three numbers. You've got to be 16 years of age or older before you can lawfully ride one of these devices. And we know that a lot of parents are buying these for, early teenagers or younger, which is, they're just not safe for those young people.
And you're seeing a lot of teenagers
on
eRideables?
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at some of the stats that are coming out of Royal Perth Hospital Trauma Unit, there's young kids getting injured on these devices. They shouldn't be riding them for a start. I see them in my own suburb, young kids, they're an attractive device. They invite you. They're fun at one level, but they're not toys. They're commuting devices. They're a transport device. The other two numbers are 25, and they relate to the mass of the device, 25 kilos or less. There are plenty of devices that are being ridden that are 25 kilos or more, so 30, 40 kilos, and they go very fast. At the moment, we've said if you fit within the 25 kilo range, you can't go more than 25 kilometres an hour, and you ride, sensibly with a helmet and a belt. That's a safe and sensible space. And as I said, you're like a bicycle, that's the principle of our regulation. But there comes a time when you go, well, when do these things become big enough, fast enough, or powerful enough to be treated more like a motorcycle than a bicycle? And that's really one of the big choices that we have to face as a community. Should these devices be allowed on our road? And if so, under what conditions? And when you open up that question, you start to look at things like, well, should they be insured? Should the vehicles be registered, have a licence plate so they can be identified in the case of a crash? Should drivers need to pass a test and be licensed? All these things. Safety standards for these devices don't exist at the moment, so we need to look at all those things. I think the fact is scooters are here to stay. Technology is developing at a rapid pace. It's up to the community and the government to make sure that our regulatory framework keeps pace with that changing technology.
So just getting back to your review, who was actually consulted for that?
We consulted with key stakeholders, including the RAC, and West Cycle is the peak body for cycling and active commuting. And then we had a broad citizen sort of engagement survey. We got a lot of feedback. We got a lot of feedback from e-scooter riders. And we got a lot of people who were sharing the paths or footpaths with e-scooter riders. So we think it was a pretty broad, comprehensive engagement, and we got some really good results.
So just in terms of the current rules, how do they compare with the other states who allow eRideables on their roads and paths?
Everyone's doing it slightly differently is probably the key point. Some states have yet to even make them legal. So we were very quick to get off the mark, and we made them, we created this lawful space. We adopted the national road rules very quickly, and other states have had challenges around particularly whether they allow hire schemes or private use scooters. So they've really struggled with the challenges around how do they fit them into their own infrastructure. In Perth, we're really blessed because we've got fantastic shared path infrastructure. I've been riding a bike for 20 odd years, and Perth has changed dramatically. I can go for a 100-kilometre bike ride, not that I do often, and you don't have to leave the shared path. It's fantastic, and it's getting better and better every day. But it's when you get into heavily congested destinations like the CBD or the tourist destinations that you have to mix with other traffic, you have to mix with pedestrians, and that's where the risk really occurs. But other jurisdictions sort of trying to follow the rules, but it's got a little bit out of sync. And that's why we're putting it on the agenda for the next National Meeting of Road Safety Officials, which is coming up very soon. And it's on the agenda to talk about how do we get better harmonisation across the country. So
just speaking of rules, it's rare to see a cyclist without a helmet, but when it comes to eRideables, there's lots of people out there without helmets. So do you think it's not being communicated well enough?
Yeah, that's interesting. And you go to Rottnest, there's always an exception to the rule, and there's almost seems to be a different rule at Rottnest around helmet wearing. But look, I think this is a classic case where the risks and the rule breaking, if you like, are different between privately owned scooters and the hire scooters that we see. Hire scooters can't, they're limited to the maximum speed of 25 kilometres an hour. We know that there's a lot of privately owned scooters that go a lot faster than that. They're unlawful devices, but they're out there. The big risks with the hire schemes are getting two people on a device and not wearing the helmet. A helmet's provided with every device. That's a requirement under the rules. Often they don't wear them. They have to actually, say that they're wearing a helmet or they've got their own helmet. So those are things that I think we need to talk with the providers of these hire scheme devices about how they can mitigate those risks. Privately owned scooter riders generally wear helmets. There's, most of them, particularly the ones that are riding at high speed, understand the need for, better protective equipment. So they're dressed up a lot like motorcycle riders would be, full-faced helmets, leather gear to protect them. So the risks are different if you're privately owned versus the hire schemes. The privately owned risks are really about speed. There are some very powerful, fast devices out there mixing with traffic, not giving way to pedestrians, not slowing down on shared paths. and that's a cultural thing. But I say that, and every time I go to work or every time I ride my bike, I see plenty of people dressed up, in their work clothes, commuting quite safely and sensibly along the major bike paths coming into the city. And, they're a great addition to our transport options.
Well, Des could be a really good one to just enlighten us. What do you think, like the general public, what the rules, do you think people are aware of all the rules, just in terms of your workshops that you run at RAC?
Yeah, well, I guess we've seen a gradual increase in knowledge of participants over the last couple of years. We ran our first e-scooter safety workshop back in April 2023. So if you remember back then, the City of Stirling Share Ride trial was in its infancy. The City of Perth and City of Vincent trials were in negotiation still. So there wasn't that en masse number of devices out on the street at the time. So the numbers certainly increased, and with that I think a number of media campaigns have been run, and the information's been disseminated really well, so that knowledge I think of general punters has gradually increased.
So in your workshops people are relatively aware of what they need to be doing?
Of the main rules, so I should balance that by saying probably just those main rules, particularly things like wearing a helmet and the speed limits, punters will when asked, will say that they're aware of the rules, they're aware of the legislation. That doesn't necessarily translate to compliance, unfortunately. So, and that's what we see out on the road. So, yeah, things have certainly shifted in terms of the base knowledge that people have over time. And I think as we continue to put information out there, as enforcement increases, then that knowledge will increase organically.
And do you have a lot of people come through your workshops? So obviously you're pushing all the rules
that's right,
as you move forward with those workshops.
Yeah, short answer to that is no. So not a huge amount of people willing, I guess, to give up the time to come to an e-scooter safety workshop. So we're working on different ways where we can break that key information down into more digestible chunks and disseminate via online and social media and things like that.
So here's a question, and I'm not sure who it's going to be related to, but most likely you, I think. Why are e-bikes not classed as eRideables?
And the answer is because they're regulated in a separate set of rules. So we've had rules around e-bikes for a long time, and the same rules apply generally. So it's a 16-year-old age limit for electric-powered assisted bicycles. 25 kilometres is the maximum speed assistance you can get out of a legal e-bike. But we do know that there are a lot of devices that look like bicycles but are in fact electric-powered motorbikes when you really look at them closely. And these, similar to the high-powered scooters, these are devices that can go very fast, don't have any great safety standards, aren't licensed or registered. They're being sold for off-road use or private use. So there's a lot of selling that's going on that sort of skirts around what I would call safe and appropriate consumer protection, but that's another conversation. But the short answer is there are rules around e-bikes, and again the key numbers are 16 and 25. We know that there are devices that you can pedal, that you actually don't have to pedal, and you can just use a throttle and you can be going 20, 30, 40 kilometres an hour. They're illegal devices. They're effectively unregistered motorbikes, and if the police were going to do an enforcement blitz, you'd risk losing them.
So eRideables, though, overall they seem quite popular in WA, don't they? So let's just take a look at some of the figures. According to the National Walking and Cycling Participation Survey from 2023, it's estimated that 2.1% of the Australian population ride an electrically assisted rideable, such as an e-scooter, an e-skateboard, and that's just in a typical week. National figures show males are more likely to use rideables than females. Nationally, around 2.8% of males and 1.4% of females ride these devices. So why do you think that people are interested using e-rideables as a mode of transport?
Well, I might go first. I ride one. Well, when they first came out, I said, well, we better know what these are about. And so we grabbed one, and, we use it in our, it gets borrowed and used in our advertising sort of campaigns every now and again. But they're a great way of getting around, particularly in the city. Like, if you're on the fringes of the city, it's a hot day, it's a brilliant device. It's as long as you're safe and sensible. Yes, it's not as active as riding a bike, but you don't turn up hot and sweaty, and you do have to use a bit of core strength to keep upright. So
that's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bit of exercise in there.
Yeah. So look, on balance, when you think about these devices, they're a really attractive option for people who want to do shorter rather than longer commutes. At a safe and sensible speed, and they don't take up much space. The biggest issue for me is where do you put them at the end of the trip? Where do you park them safely? And I think that's a challenge for local governments. We give a lot of space for parking for bikes, plenty of parking for cars. To what extent would councils be prepared to sort of give up a little bit of space and take it away from one vehicle to allow for more space for others? They're here to stay. I think there's probably e-bikes are more popular. They've been around longer, and there's a certain minority of people who really want to ride fast devices. They're living in Butler, for example. They want to be able to come in fast. They don't want to spend 2 hours commuting. They want to get here faster. That's a different transport option generally than short, 4 or 5 kilometres here or there, or a couple of kilometres across town, or going up to the local shops and back. I think they're a niche. I don't think there's going to be a huge explosion. The higher schemes, are more visible because they're out there and they're brightly coloured and they're in the, places where people tend to concentrate on the weekends or during the week in the CBD. But I don't think we're at risk of being overrun by e-scooters. I think they have a part to play, and I think it's a really positive part if people remember the rules.
Okay, so just in terms of like motorists driving along, how should they view e-rideables?
Yeah, look, we know that too many of them see e-rideables and cyclists for that matter as a nuisance, but they've got a right to be there. And just like we want to reduce the risk to pedestrians from e-rideables being on the footpath at high speeds, we don't want to increase the risk for those e-scooters and other riders when they move onto a road. So it's really important that we do that in low-speed traffic to reduce the risk. But the fundamental thing that I would say to all car drivers is that it's a shared space. It's not your space. Too many people think that, and modern cars almost invite you to think that sitting in the driver's seat is like an extension of your living room. It's comfortable, it's got all bells and whistles, but it's a shared space. They've got a right to be there. And the other thing is that you're the one who's going to do the damage. If you're in a car, doesn't matter who's right or wrong, you've got to expect that pedestrians might just walk out suddenly because they see the shop across the road, or a cyclist might weave in and out or a scooter rider for that matter will weave in and out because they can. You've got to anticipate and expect that. And the principle is your job's not to hit them if you can. Regardless of whether you're in the right, you're the one who's going to do the damage. And that's something we want to prevent. And it's an attitude shift that we need to say it's a shared space. We all need to get home safely.
Des, I'm just interested to ask, the people that come to your workshops, they're basically people that own the e-scooters or the eRideables. They're not people that just go out and hire them, are they?
There is a mixture. So some people do attend just to get more information around the safety side of things before they jump on their first or engage in the share ride services. But again, the benefits, just going back to that last question, the benefits can't be ignored. And in our presentations, there is a dedicated section on the benefits, sustainability and affordability being the main two. So I feel like if ridden safely, like the benefits can potentially outweigh the negatives in relation to e-rideables. Yeah.
But there's probably a lot of people out there that will go, oh, I'll just go hire that without really having any prior knowledge or experience. Which I guess is a concern.
Well, there are some risks in novice riders for any device, but the way that we've approached that with the hire scheme providers is that if it's your first time on a device and you log onto the app and you unlock the device, for the first little while it will limit your speed. So until you demonstrate that you're comfortable on the device, you can't really go super fast. So it sort of helps you learn the ropes without going too fast and taking too many risks. But they're not hard things to ride. If you can ride a bike, you can ride a scooter. Once you're sort of comfortable on the device and you understand how how sensitive the throttle is to accelerate or brake, how hard to brake, then, it's a fairly easy ride. We're mitigating those risks. But that's one of the things that I think the parliamentary inquiry will have to look at is, technology's changing so fast. The scooters that are on our streets now are three years old, more. So technology's moved a long way. The new devices that you would put on the streets now have things like cameras built in and AI, artificial intelligence sitting behind it. So it effectively can look at the number of legs it sees on the running plate. So if there are 4 legs, that it won't go. It stops you from going until someone gets off the device. Similarly, you can have a camera looking up at your head to see if there's a helmet on your head. I'm not sure the technology's that good that it can detect if it's strapped on properly, but it can certainly see if there's something on your head. So again, these are improvements that are happening now that that will be examined by the inquiry, and local governments. If we can help local governments by raising the bar on the sort of standards when they go out to tender for these new businesses or licensed new businesses, that's going to help everybody.
So in terms of your workshops, Des, what do people normally go for? Like, why are they there? Why do they initially come along?
It's also shifted over time. So that initial wave of workshops, we got a lot of first-time riders or people looking to potentially purchase their first device or use a share ride device for the first time. But that has changed over the last couple of years. So we get more people attending to get more of an insight into the legislation, changes to the legislation, those sorts of things. And recent interest from parents and parent groups around more the buying guide component. So in the workshops, we unpack what the legislative definition of an eRideable is, and that kind of leads into that buying guide conversation. So parents are really interested in that component now prior to purchasing a device for their child.
So what do other road and path users think of these eRideables?
The research and what we found in the review is that there's a large body of pedestrians particularly who are fearful of fast-moving, relatively quiet devices coming up from behind them. And early on, back when we first introduced the rules, there was a horrific incident captured on CCTV where a lady coming out of a shop was cleaned up by a scooter.
That was terrible.
Travelling too fast on the footpath. Cleaned up was horrible. So there's this fear because they're new, because they're quiet, because people aren't riding as safely and as sensibly as they should. But generally, as I would say this, I am not aware of any major incident that involves a lawful scooter being ridden within the rules. So when you look at the horrible crashes we've had, the deaths, the serious injuries, by and large, the problems are unlawful devices being ridden outside of the rules. So unlawful devices being ridden unlawfully, or a combination of both. So the solution is, it's not so much tighter rules, although we are going to look at penalties, because I think the penalties do have a part to play for some people who are minded to break the rules. But it's mostly around educating people, looking at whether we can reduce the conflict, particularly between scooters and pedestrians, because pedestrians, particularly in the CBD and on shared paths, are saying that we want to feel safer, and that means finding another place for these scooters to go. I get the same complaints about bicycles on footpaths and shared paths. Now, many, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but we've had allowed bicycles on footpaths for years. And footpaths on local streets where a parent might be helping their child learn to ride a bike, following safely behind them. That's a great thing to see as you drive down the street. It's different when you're in the CBD or heavy tourist areas where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. The best place for bicycles and scooters to be is on the road, so long as that road is a slow-moving road, so it's a low-speed road. Otherwise, we're just shifting the risk rather than lowering the risk.
And just looking at the penalties, what are the penalties for misusing an eRideable?
Yeah, again, it comes back to this principle that, when we introduced the rules, we said, let's treat them like a bicycle. And the principle around that is unless there was a good reason to have different penalties, we'd apply the same penalties that apply to bicycles. So the penalty for not wearing a helmet on an e-scooter is the same penalty for not wearing a helmet on a bicycle. The penalty for double dinking, as I used to call it, but two people on a device on a bicycle is the same as the two people on a scooter. So all those penalties are the same. One of the things that people may not be aware of is that the drink driving laws, or drink riding in this case, apply to e-scooters. We know, and particularly there was an issue with some of the hire schemes, it's opportunistic that people come out of the pub on 10 o'clock onwards on a Friday or a Saturday night, and they're going, well, how am I going to get home? They haven't really planned their journey or their evening that well. They'll see a device and they'll pop on it, and they'll see it's a good way to get home. It's not a good way to get home. The risks are pretty high when you've been drinking, and the penalties for drink driving apply if your cops pick you up. They all apply.
And that's on par with e-bikes as well? The penalties are the same?
Yeah, that's right.
So just in terms of an e-scooter and the eRideables, can you take them on Perth Transport at all?
I wish you could take them on more often. It certainly does limit people who want to use them as a way to get to the train station and get on the commute to Perth, either north or south, because people in public transport will tell you the facts. But my general observation is we can never have enough train carriages. The more you have, the more people get on them, and in peak hour times, it's pretty jam packed. So the Transport Authority, I think, has made a rule that in peak times don't go on with them, but other than that you can generally take them on the trains.
Do you think they might ease those restrictions or regulations?
Look, I hope so, but I think it comes down to, how do you balance the idea of, the general population who wants to get on the train, and then people with devices but we have the same issue now with parents with prams. We find a way to accommodate parents with prams because we think that's appropriate and reasonable, and
helpful.
They're important. It's a policy choice for us to say, well, we should allow these devices. But some of the bigger, more powerful devices are pretty bulky. The legal devices generally fold down. The scooter I use can fold down and I can carry it. It's as heavy as a pretty heavy suitcase, and you can sort of park it under your seat and or stand over the top of it. So it doesn't take up too much space.
So what types of injury do we typically see in users of eRideables?
The nature of the beast is, particularly e-scooters, small wheels as opposed to big wheels on a bicycle. So even running into a small stone or a honky nut on the road, or a crack in the road, you're likely to come off. If you do come off, there's a greater likelihood of just falling straight over the handlebars, so face planting. So there's a lot compared to falling off a bike, where if you hit something you tend to fall off to the side. There's a lot more people that just flip over the handlebars and then they end up face down, or head injuries become much more dominant. I was actually talking to the head of the Royal Perth State Trauma Unit, which is where most of the major crash injuries go in the first instance, and they're saying yes, it's a lot of head injuries, and mostly to do with not wearing helmets. A lot of people, driving after having a few drinks, so impaired driving, drug or drink driving, and the nature of the injuries are associated with that. So, the normal stuff you get, falling, fractured bones, but a lot of head injuries and a lot of serious implications and complications because of that.
So the majority of patients were male, and the most common age group bracket was 31 to 45-year-olds. More than half of these patients were not wearing a helmet, and 39% had consumed alcohol and or drugs.
Yeah, and this goes back to my point that most of the major problems are unlawful devices and unlawful behaviour. But it is a male problem, and in the observational study that we conducted with UWA found that the majority of users were male. That said, I think there's an increasing number of young women who are I see, although in my limited travels, I see along the major bike paths commuting to work or out on a Sunday for recreational riding. But it's dominated. The injury rates are dominated by men. And that's partly because they want to go faster than lawful speeds. We know a lot of them are travelling at high speeds, 50, 60, 70 kilometres an hour. They're mixing on high-speed roads with fast-moving traffic, which is just a recipe for disaster. it's a male problem.
And we've had like 4 fatalities involving eRideables since the start of the year, and one of those included a pedestrian. That's obviously like quite a concern.
Yeah, well, this is the, when you look at this, since the rules came in, we've had 8 fatalities. There was a couple early on, and then this year there's been 4, and as you say, one of them pedestrian. And if you look at the behaviour that's been alleged there, and that matters before the courts, that's a combination of, every rule you could think of being broken was being broken. That's a horrible event, and it just shows that we have to look at how we can de-risk those situations by working with the hire scheme providers, by looking at our regulations and looking at our engagement and some of our penalties.
How do the injury rates from eRideables compare to e-bikes and non-motorised bicycles?
This is one of the areas which touches on a big problem. We just don't have enough good data to really understand, even determining, the question I have in my head is, how many of the really bad accidents are happening on the hire scheme devices, which are tightly regulated for speed, versus privately owned scooters? And how many of those privately owned scooters are actually unlawful devices? Like, are they too big, too powerful, too fast?
So do we have any data that compares injury rates from those using hire scooters to those who actually have their own? Because obviously I just feel as a layperson, if you had gone out and physically bought yourself an e-scooter, you're going to spend more time trying to, make sure you know how to ride it. It's like driving a car, really. But if you're going to hire it, you can just, if you've got a credit card, pretty much you can tap and go.
Yeah, and that's a presumption we had. Some of the stuff that we found through the surveys is that there are people who do that, but they also want to ride faster in places that they shouldn't. And there's also the thrill seeker element. We've all seen a few videos of, young kids without a helmet, 2 on a device, going 70 or 80 kilometres down Leach Highway, weaving in and out of traffic. The short answer is we don't have enough good data that we would like to answer all these, good questions about, where is the risk happening? What's the we do know that just logically there's a different type of risk for hire schemes versus privately owned scooters, and there's certainly a high risk for people who are using unlawful devices, be they e-bikes or e-motorbikes or e-scooters that are capable of going 50, 60, 70 kilometres an hour or higher. That's fundamentally where we need to ask, do we keep them illegal and enforce them, or how do we deal with them, or do we look at creating a legal space for them under stricter conditions and safer conditions to mitigate the risk of these people turning up at Royal Perth and all the emergency departments around the state? I would say that the stats that I've seen, most of the problems are occurring in Perth because that's where I think most of the scooters are. I've talked to the hire scooter providers, and you look at the millions of trips that they do, and so the numbers of crashes that they're reporting through their own systems. And every time there's a crash on one of these devices, the hire company knows about it because the technology in the devices recognises that it's fallen over. They're saying that for the volume of trips, and in the hire schemes are very popular in some places, it's a very low percentage of crashes. But we just don't know how that compares to, say, the sort of comparable rate of bicycle crashes, and bikes been around for a long time.
And just on bicycles, what makes an e-scooter less stable than a bike?
Combination of things. I guess the small wheels that Adrian mentioned, the low centre of gravity of the device, combined with the high upright position of the rider, I guess creates that unstable platform. As Adrian mentioned, fairly easy for a novice rider to overcome that in a short amount of time and be comfortable and stable while riding an eRideable. But it's those same factors that contribute to or dramatically change the physics in an eRideable crash as opposed to a bicycle crash. So that's where you see that sudden stopping of that small front wheel leads to that sort of face to pavement, almost not providing a rider with any time to react, which is different to the physics involved in a bicycle crash. One
of the other concerns I've heard from transport authorities and read reports from around the world is the safety concerns around batteries. And again, this is an area around safety standards where we need to look at, and I think the the parliamentary inquiry will be a great opportunity for us to examine this. Basically, things that are imported and comply with the rules, are relatively safe. But we know there's a lot of devices that include a lot of batteries that aren't suited for our power supply. And if not maintained properly or not monitored properly, they can lead to horrible fires. And, if you talk to people in the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, one of their biggest issues is in a lot of modern devices, the stuff you buy in the hardware store, a lot of online shopping comes with unsafe batteries. So I think that's something we need to address too.
Do you think things will settle down?
Well, our review said that by and large, most people understand the rules and a lot of people are complying with them. So even in our observational study, the vast majority of people were complying with the rules in terms of basic speed and legal devices. Technology is running ahead very rapidly, and generally that's a good thing. These are all great additions and options for people, and as Des said, there are a lot of benefits for getting people out of cars, and a lot of our car journeys are a single person in a big car travelling a short distance. And that comes with air pollution issues, not just from the exhaust pipe, but increased particles from wear and tear on tyres. And, the RAC is doing a great job in terms of monitoring air pollution because they've realised that's key to a healthy life in an urban environment. So getting people out of cars and onto electric-powered devices that, so long as people are safe and sensible, I think has a lot of advantages. And, it reduces congestion, it reduces commute times. There are a whole lot of positive knock-on effects. So I don't think the solution is to ban these devices. I think the solution is to make sure that we've got the appropriate balance that mitigates the risks, and we try and get more people to comply with the rules than that they are at the moment.
Well, it certainly sounds like they're here to stay. So do you think there'll be a focus on changing infrastructure?
Look, I think that's certainly going to be part of the options. I think, as I said, Perth has got fantastic architecture, the sort of main arterial paths for bikes and other devices. The shared path network is just great. But it's where we have to mix in city centres, where we're effectively retrofitting. A couple of the councils I know have created sort of bike lanes, taking away a lane of traffic and putting in dedicated bike lanes, which I think is really good. And it's a classic case of if you build it, they will come. The research that we have from bike riders and e-scooter riders is that they're scared of cars. So pedestrians are scared of bikes and scooters, and scooter riders and that are scared of cars because they do more damage, and so it's logical to be scared. So there's a lot of research that says if we create better places or separated places, it's safer, number one, but it also promotes more activity. And as I say, the more people getting out of cars for distances that and trips that can be done safely on a personal device like an e-scooter, then there's a whole lot of benefits that come. So creating active transport options, including scooters and bikes, including giving them dedicated separate infrastructure, and slowing car speeds down promotes a whole lot of economic activity, which is good for local businesses.
So, Adrian, what are you actually doing right now to roll out the education for people who either have an eRideable or are going to ride on an eRideable?
Yeah, look, thanks for that question. It's as I said, the review made recommendations about enforcement, about rule making, but largely it's around education and engagement. And the RAC is doing some great work with community engagement around teaching people the rules and getting people safe. One of the things that we're doing is we've partnered with Westcycle, which is the peak body for cycling and active mobility, and they've made a deliberate choice to go into the space of also dealing with e-scooters and the like. And we've partnered with them for a couple of years, but we've just introduced a new element to that partnership, which is about schools. So we call it the eRideable program. And they're going into schools to young age people, teaching them what an e-scooter is, what a lawful device is, what an unlawful device is, but also teaching them in a safe space, in a lawful space, how to ride safely. It's an extension of our bicycle riding programs that we fund in schools, and we think that's really important. The other thing we're rolling out is it's a really exciting program. We're calling it Road Smart Kickstart, and it's a school incursion program. We're targeting year 7s and 8s, and later on this year we'll be rolling out for year 9s. I might get the words wrong, but it's a heavily gamified and technology dense
they'll love
incursion.
it.
They do. So the feedback we're getting is fantastic. There's, virtual reality goggles, all sorts of, bits and bobs, and, one touch screen. So it's a bit of an exercise to set up, but we've got a custom built van and we've got dedicated staff who are basically out there on the road pretty much every day, delivering these programs to schools, particularly in the regional areas.
Yeah.
So we think that's going to go gangbusters, and we want to try and get more people and more vans out on the road, so that every school and every cohort across the state, whether you're in Perth, down in Albany, or up in the Pilbara or north, gets the access to this type of education, because it's really important in the long term to capture people's attitudes, young kids' attitudes early. We know that kids sitting in the back seat looking at mum and dad driving are soaking up their behaviours from a very early age. We've got some good programs that help them get their learner's permit and teach them how to drive safely, but it's really getting their attitudes locked in around understanding risk, understanding choices, understanding the road environment. And so far it's been fantastic. So I'm really excited to see how far and fast we can run with that program. And then the other thing that it's a new thing I've learned is that traditionally Road Safety Commission has done a lot of mass advertising campaigns. In the last couple of years, we've shifted a lot of our resources into targeted digital advertising. A lot of people are on their devices. A lot of younger people consume most of their information on their handheld device rather than sitting in front of free-to-air TV. And podcasts like this are, just another fantastic option that people are consuming. So we're doing a lot of our advertising in a targeted way on digital platforms. So we can find men, we can find young people, we can find regional cohorts just through our advertising targeting. And a lot of that is trying to make information in a sort of not a fun way, but in an accessible format that's a lot of animation, and we're getting a lot of good feedback on the way we're doing that.
So it's got the right appeal to the right people.
Well, it's the right message to the right people at the right time, and that's exactly right, and appeal is part of it, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Adrian and Des.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, let us know and share it with a friend. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next episode of RAC's Horizons podcast.